Hello, this is Mark Smerschel. I'm Vice President and co-presenter for BeneFLEX HR Resources. Today, this is an introduction to 3 separate educational webinars, and whether you're joining us because you're interested in Part 1, Understanding the FMLA Employer Requirements, Part 2, How to Identify and Investigate FMLA Abuse, or 3, focusing on ERISA and Department of Labor audits, you're going to be excited because all 3 of these webinars were approved by SHRM and HRCI and the Department of Insurance for professional credit at the seminar we presented a while back. So when we're talking about BeneFLEX, we want to make sure you understand we're a third-party administrator that focuses on pre-tax accounts. We were started 23 years ago by Jim Smerschel of Smerschel and Tallor, and we work on these accounts with many clients in the Midwest and on both coasts. Most recently, we added services due to ACA. We added the reporting. And in January of 2017, the Qualified Small Employer HRA was brought forward as a way for small employers who don't offer insurance to reimburse their employees' individual health care coverage costs through an HRA. Now, when we're talking about BeneFLEX, we wouldn't do anything without our partners that we work with. And these are some of our clients that are very strong partners when it comes to benefits, and they drive a lot of the services that we bring forward because they share their needs with us. And it's the BeneFLEX team that is here to help you when you call in, and all team members, when you reach BeneFLEX, will help you with your plans, or they can help get you to the person that knows about their plans, because each one is certified by the Employers Council on Flexible Compensation. But the other part of BeneFLEX that you don't see is the partners behind the scene. Our Bene card, or the Red Bene, has been around for 20 years and has been meeting the needs of flex programs for all of our clients. Well, that partnership is very dependent upon a second partnership, which is the financial institutions behind the scene. The HIPAA high tech and the protection that we bring forward from our IT partnership, and the customer service and IVR that we have available. The programs that run the software, the Flex, the HRA, TMA, all of those are a partnership with WEX Healthcare, and that works with Allegis, which makes the card work at the pharmacies. And then lastly, we have Smerschel Tallor, our sister company, who is a very strong partnership with the audits and controls they have in place to make sure that your accounts and your plans are kept in compliance. So why are we here today? Our partners, meaning our clients, were very good about bringing back the surveys that we sent out, asking what were some areas they needed help in. And 74% of you very strongly identified FMLA as something that you wanted additional discussion or you wanted additional help with in terms of the resources. So to do that, we had to go out and find a new partner. And BASIC is that new partner, because BASIC is a top 25 HR technology winner in 2017. So what that means is by finding a strong partner on the technology side, BeneFLEX can take that technology and be a conduit for all of our existing clients and new clients that need FMLA or ERISA, because by having a large amount of volume going through, we can get you a package price and a better deal. And you already have a strong relationship with BeneFLEX, so why start a new one when you can work with a trusted partner? So in speaking of trusted partners, I want to introduce Joe Aitchison, who is going to present the 2 presentations on FMLA and the 1 presentation on ERISA. Joe is a human resource professionalist with over 25 years in the business. He is recognized as a leader in that his profession, and he has obtained a lifetime certification as a senior professional in human resource management by SHRM. He is a certified senior professional and HR specialist by Healthcare Reform Centers and Policy Institute. Here's Joe.
This is probably my most fun one when it comes to FMLA. It really, really is. I shouldn't really use the term fun, but it is. If I get excited, I can't help it, because this is where I spend a lot of my time, is on this stuff here. It's called creative thinking with challenging employers, is what it should say. And again, God bless you. What we're going to talk about here is, I'm going to go into some real examples under FMLA that should hit home. How many of you actually are FMLA qualifying employers? Okay, great. Because how many of you do FMLA currently that are, I'm leaving now? No, I'm kidding. Because I'm going to pull up a 380 form, even though you can't read it. I apologize, because you know what a 380E or 380F form looks like. A lot of stuff on there. But I'm going to pull up a couple real live examples for you.
Joe, can I have Joe?
No, that's fine. And here I put on just a couple of web pages where you can get some information, and I encourage you to draw down these two documents, the fact sheet 28G and the E-Law FMLA guideline from the DOL. I really encourage you to draw those down if you deal with the FMLA. Best practice stuff is important. And here is a 380 form. For Joe, it's a 380E form. And that E, as I said before, means employee, and the F means a family member. Okay, that's the only difference in the forms, a little bit of language different. But Joe Smith, he works in a manufacturing company, and his regular work schedule is 8 to 4:30, half an hour lunch, 2 breaks. This is the part that you as an employer fill out. This is your part. And it says, what's the employee's essential job functions? And we talked about that earlier, right? You want to do the essential job functions, very important on all of your job descriptions for a lot of different reasons. If anything, as an HR person, will keep you out of trouble later on when you have challenging employees, that's the one that'll help you. And it's not, when we talk about problem employees, even with the FMLA, it's not your whole workforce. It always goes to that 10%, right? That 10 or 15% that's your problem employees for the most part. It's not your whole workforce. And so we've got Joe Smith. He stands up 7 hours daily, lifts 25 pounds, and he's repetitively lifting and moving parts that weigh 2 pounds, just a manufacturing job shop kind of thing. Is asked, do you have a job description attached? And no, I didn't do that for this one. This is a medical certification, doctor part. Approximately the date the condition commenced, I just put May 15th, 2017. Here's the first issue. It's a lifetime issue. And you guys are going, I know where he's going with this. Lifetime. A lifetime FMLA condition. They exist. You all know they do. GERD, a couple other things. Migraines, stuff like that, back conditions. And so this is a lifetime condition diagnosed by his general practitioner. We'll start with that. And then, was the patient admitted for an overnight stay? The answer is no, so it doesn't qualify for FMLA at this point. Dates you treated the patient for the condition: May 19th, 4 days after the condition was noticed by the patient, allegedly. Will the patient need to have treatment visits at least twice per year due to this condition? No, but it's a lifetime condition. Red flag number 1, right? And then from there, what we're looking at, was medication other than over-the-counter medications prescribed? Yes. Pain pills. Okay, right? You guys have seen it. And then was the patient referred to other healthcare provider for evaluation? I put yes. recommended physical patient visit a chiropractor or a back specialist. I just wrote that in there. So going on, is the employee unable to perform any of his or her job functions due to the condition? Yes. If so, identify the job functions the employee is unable to perform. First of all, when you get these, if they're handwritten, you can't read the damn things anyway most of the time if they come back from the healthcare provider, which is a problem. So you have a right to go for clarification, kick it back to the employee and say, can you have the doctor do that? Or you do have a right to contact the doctor's office to have them clarify what they've written on that. However, a lot of times you get caught up in their HIPAA stuff and they don't want to do that. So kick it back to the employee and say, look, we're going to hold this time in abeyance. In other words, we're not going to say whether it's FMLA qualifying or not, but we don't understand what the doctor is trying to say to us. So please get it clarified. And that's well within your rights to do as well. Okay? And then if the employee is unable to perform his and her job due to this condition, yes. If so, identify the functions the employee is unable to perform. God, I love this. When back pain occurs, employee is to refrain from lifting or repetitive motion. Okay, we know it's FMLA qualifying now, and he can't work if he's got pain because he can't lift or anything. Didn't say restrictions at all, it just says he can't do it. Describe other relevant medical facts. Employee suffers from a mild to a moderate level of degenerative back disease, i.e. lifetime. And we all will suffer from that when we get older. So that's your first FMLA clue when you don't want to work anymore. Just say, I got a bad back because I'm getting older. It'll work. Really, it will. And so suffers from mild to moderate level of degenerative back disease, creates a moderate to severe level of back pain, episodic, based on level of physical exertion. It didn't say physical exertion at work. It said when he's out golfing, water skiing, God knows what he's doing, playing basketball or bowling, he can't come to work the next day because he hurts his back, right? For a partial day, maybe, or a full day. Will the employee be incapacitated? Yes. If so, estimate the beginning and ending date for the periods. It's lifetime. Will the employee need to attend follow-up? Yes. So everything means it's FMLA qualified. I'm jumping down to here now. I know you can't read it, and I apologize. Will the condition cause episodic flare-ups? Yes. If it's medically necessary for the employee to be absent from work during the flare-up, yes. When condition exists, patient is not able to work. This is the typical FMLA intermittent leave 380E or 380F form that you'll get back for migraines or anything along this line. It's a free pass. Remember the Starbucks thing I told you about, the worker in Las Vegas? It's the same thing. Except her condition was different. Additional information. When condition occurs is moderate to severe, prescribe medication to reduce pain and may return to work the same or the next day depending on the severity. Very, very typical. So what happens here is that now you have that Starbucks kind of employee. Now it can be very legitimate. I mean, all of us suffer from back pain on an occasion, but we buck it up and we go to work most of the time unless it's really severe, and if it's really bad, your good employees, they're not out all the time, and chances are they're not going to go for the FMLA. The M word that we talked about, the supervisor, right? You know, my back was really hurting again. I'm sorry, Mary, I couldn't come into work yesterday because my back was just killing me. Yeah, I know I was out playing basketball the night before, and I probably shouldn't have, but my back was killing me and I just couldn't come in. Now, is that back killing me another word for the M word, right? Kick it to the front office and say, you know, Joe, go to the front office and tell them about your condition because there may be something that we need to be taking a further look at. Something, the front office needs to know that. That's how you train your supervisors. It doesn't have to be any more complex than that, okay? Very, very simple and very easy. I'm not saying that your supervisors are not capable of understanding more. I don't mean to do that. But don't complicate their lives with stuff that they don't need to worry about and give them a whole lot of stuff. Just say if it's that M word, kick it up front, period. And if you don't, call me. I'll do it for you because that's what I do with all the clients. It's very simple. And then that would be the first step. So now we got him there. And we're going to talk about if I start to take advantage of that, which if I'm smart, which I am, I probably will, because I can. Okay. So I'm going to move on here a minute. When do you recertify? Without a connection to an absence? Or don't, I was just going to read it, don't recertify without a connection to an absence. We find some employers will do this. They have a 6-month recertification policy. So I'll just start with January 1. I have my back condition. It's a lifetime. I can recertify that every 6 months. That's my recommendation, just to see if it's severe or better. And so July 1 rolls around. So I'm up for recertification. So my employer has this tickled on their system, July 1. Your FMLA 6-month period is done. Go to the doctor and get a new cert form, right? The answer is wrong. That's in violation of the FMLA. The FMLA says very specifically, first event following 6 months. So using that, if I didn't call off for my back injury on my certification form until August 1st, that's my qualifying event because I'm beyond the July 1st date. First event following 6 months. It's not an auto recert because nothing has happened to me to trigger the FMLA. So, that could be looked at as retaliation for taking FMLA because you're causing me to go to the doctor to get a new certification form, which means I'm going to have to pay my doctor $25 or whatever that amount is to get that cert form filled out when I didn't have a condition, even though it's a lifetime condition.
You're saying 6 months after.
Right. So in the example, the question was not 6 months after the event, 6 months after the initial certification date is a new cert date. So January 1, I just used, let's say February 1. February 1, I had my original certification. We go 6 months, it would take me to July or August 1st, right? And then August 15th is when I have my next condition. August 1st is the end of my 6 months, so that old certification is done. August 15th is my new certification for that condition. So always from the event after the end of that 6-month period, if you use that 6-month recert date. And I'm using that because typically that's what I recommend for lifetime certifications. It's no more frequent than that. You can recertify for migraines and all that is not considered lifetime up to as often as every 30 days. You can, but I don't recommend it because all you're doing is research, and it'll drive you crazy. Yes?
What about doing it every year?
You can also do it every year. You can set your certification periods up to whatever best fits your practice. Okay. The question is, what happens if you have another lifelong condition that's happening during the first lifelong condition period? Then you're tracking that 6 months separate from this condition. So you're recertifying for each type of condition as well. So I may end up going back for recerts, could be every 3 months for different conditions. Yes, you can do that. Because you're not certifying just FMLA, you're certifying for the specific FMLA condition for yourself or for a family member. They're all different, remember? Okay. That's why they have the 380E and the 380F forms, and you can have multiples. For the purpose of discouraging someone from taking leave, and this is where if you do a 30 day and you know they're going to have to pay 25 to 50 bucks and you're doing that for that, to get that certification, are you doing it because you want to discourage them from doing it? You've got a $15 an hour person, and so you're saying every 30 days if for your migraine condition you got to go back and get a recertification, it's going to cost you $50 a month. What's the purpose? You're going to get asked that question if there's a complaint filed. Even though it's within your right, because it's within your right, don't you have to have a common sense answer for something? Other than, I'm not sure, we've always done it that way. It isn't going to fly. Okay. They do it on their own personal time, but we have to be careful because it's potentially FMLA qualifying and their doctor is going to write them off for it. They will. So I wouldn't worry too much about that if they have FMLA leave time available. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Without reasonable suspicion of fraudulent activity. This one right here we're going to dig into. This is a fun one, and I'll help you work through how you can do that. Don't pick and choose. You don't like me, but you like Pete better. So you make me recert every 30 days, but Pete doesn't even have to recertify. How come? And so how do you explain that? And if I filed a complaint, it would be problematic. So systemically, like you do all of your other processes, make sure that you have a process in place for your FMLA. Okay? Very, very important. A systemic process. Yes?
What about if it's a...
Okay. The question is, what about for a family member? And we sometimes don't want to get into all of that medical information about family because it's personal and we don't want to go there as an employer. The answer is, if you set your rules, my recommendation is that you follow your rules regardless of it being the employee or the a family member. It's the standard. Because when problems occur, they're going to find a reason to pick on you, and they'll pick on you because you have variations in treatment. How come you're doing it this way and this way? Now you can argue and you can say that we do this for family, but we do this for employees all the way across the board. But personally, I would recommend that you do, your certification period is every 6 months, is what my recommendation is, generally speaking. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have to list it?
Yes. Yes, the question is that you have to notify the individual employees of what your recertification period is. Yes. Can you change your recertification period? And we do this with some employers. Believe it or not, some of these larger employees set up all of their FMLA on a calendar year years ago because it was easier to track, January through December 31st. And they were having problems when you get to Thanksgiving through February because of the holidays, and if you run out of PTO time, that's okay, you still have FMLA time for your holidays. So if you had extra time, they were jamming up all of their FMLA, calling off unscheduled for their FMLA events towards the end of the year because they had it available, and then they were stacking on the beginning of the year, so that when you're looking at 12 weeks of continuous leave, if you can do that, you've got 24 weeks off end of the year and the beginning of the year. Doesn't work so well when you work on what I call a fixed calendar day. And that's why we do recommend a look-back period for FMLA. For continuous leave, when is it okay to recertify? Employer receives information that casts doubt upon the employee's stated reason for the absence. And I just gave a real simple example, and this could be that back injury that was on that cert form. An employee is on FMLA leave for 4 weeks due to an employee's knee surgery. That can be real, right? Can't be on his feet for 4 weeks, maybe in crutches, but you don't want to bring him back, so you just put him on short-term disability, let Joe heal, and come back to work, right? Okay, makes sense, that sounds real. However, including recuperation, and the employee then plays in a company softball league game during the employee's 3rd week of FMLA. Now come on, give me a break. You can't come to work, but you can play on the softball league with all of your buddies. What are your buddies going to do? They're going to come in and do what? The office and tell HR, hey, I'm doing his work and he's playing softball? You think you have a right to go for a recertification on that? The answer is yes, because you've got reasonable doubt that Joe maybe could come back to work. However, just because I played in the softball game after knee surgery doesn't mean I didn't pay any consequences for being so stupid, right? And so my healthcare provider can still come back and say, Joe, you were pretty stupid for doing that. Now I've got to put you out another week because you tore up what I thought I was feeling better. Well, no, you weren't better. So now you're off for another additional week. So is that FMLA qualifying? The answer is yeah. It was just that I was stupid. Can you punish me for being stupid? If you could, you wouldn't have any employees left, right? So don't go there. So the answer is, yeah, I cast doubt on it, but I was just being stupid. And my doctor is also my neighbor. So whatever I want to do, he's going to write me off for. Okay, intermittent leaves. When is it okay to recertify? After 6 months, if certified duration is lifetime, the employer receives information that casts doubt about an employee's stated reason for absence, or the continuing validity of that certification in conjunction with an absence. Example 2, an employee calls out FMLA leave for a migraine. How many of you have migraines where you work? Yeah. I'm giving you one right now, and I respect that. Okay. So, calling off for it, and then the employee takes their children to a public swimming pool during working hours. Come on. What are you thinking? If you've got a migraine, you can't go to work, how in God's name can you take your kids to a swimming pool? Okay? And then you get reported by a coworker. Goes into HR, and HR is told about this. Do you have some credible reasons to think the duck ain't quacking here? Something's not right? Right? Okay. This information may be sufficient to cast doubt upon the continuing validity of that certification and allowing the employer to request a recert. Thank you for that question. How can an employer use a personal Facebook page against them? I've got a couple rules, and I'm not friends with anybody at work on Facebook or any of that because I'm a manager. I like to think of myself as a manager. My coworkers call me another name, but we won't go there. But the answer to the question is, if you're friends with that employee and you discover that yourself and you do something as an HR manager or someone in authority, like the owner of the company says, I saw this on Joe's Facebook page, and that's it, fire him. That may not be the best way to react, but it's like, think of this, every complaint investigation that you guys do is brought to you by an employee, correct? If an employee outside of yourself, that woke everybody up, outside of yourself discovers that, you have a responsibility to do what? Investigate, just like you do everything else. So even if you find it yourself, say, no attorneys, right? Hey, did you see something? If so, tell me. Send me an email. Do something So it triggers you to go. Once you're triggered, it's just like every other investigation that you've conducted. No different. Facebook or otherwise. But you can't generate it yourself, and you know the reason why is because then you selected me. You didn't select anybody else in the whole wide world. You don't like me even though I'm your best friend. You selected me. And then you kicked off the investigation. So just like every other one. Significant changes in frequency or duration. Now that certification form, Joe truly does have a bad back, and on occasion he may go out and play golf, and he's stupid for doing that, right? He takes his medication and he can't come into work. Okay, yes, I'm stupid. Yes, it's FMLA qualified, and I have a right to do that, and I can't lift and move my 2-pound parts. You can't fire me for being stupid. Like I said, you wouldn't have any employees left. And so from that standpoint, I can take my FMLA. If I'm doing that every Tuesday and Thursday because of my golf league, now we're starting to get a little different story, right? And I'm going out with my buddies and drinking a little bit and not coming in. Something's happening here. That's because, yeah, I do have a back condition, but now I'm getting the idea that maybe I can do a little bit more, and I don't necessarily need my money, you know, that much just to pay for my beer after the golf. That's all I need. So 2 days, 3 days will cover that. So I'm doing that. So when can you do stuff? And we'll talk about that here just coming up, because you're starting to see a pattern of absences in connection with an absence. What I'm trying to say there, and I didn't say it well, I have to rewrite that slide, is that the Tuesday, Thursdays on Golf League, we've had FMLA intermittent leave coincide with days off on the school calendar. We've had it coincide obviously with holidays. What do you mean you won't give my vacation to me so I can take before and after the holiday, Thanksgiving? I wanted to take the full week. What do you mean I can't do that? I'm off on FMLA. Okay? You have reason to believe that that is not necessarily a true FMLA. And so you do have some rights, and we'll get to what those are. On an initial certification, not on a recert, but on a new certification. A new certification is Joe's first back injury. And remember, it was done by his healthcare general practitioner, and it was recommended that Joe see a chiropractor or a specialist, a back specialist. Did I do that? No. Did it mean it wasn't FMLA qualifying under my general practitioner's statements? Could be up to 8 hours, and yeah, I've got painkillers for that. Can you say to Joe, you know what, let's get a research or get a second opinion on this by a back specialist? The answer is you as an employer can require that. Once you require it, then you pay for it. Okay? And then, so now you send them to a second opinion, you paid for it, and the specialist says, Joe's perfectly fine. You know, he sprained his back, that's all it is. And his recovery period is going to be 3 or 4 weeks, and he's fine. He's able to come back to work. So now you've got one that says lifetime and another one that says it's a sprained back. So you paid for this one, which cost you $500 minimum for that. Then you have to send them to a third opinion. You can select the second one, but the third one has to be like a mutual decision between you and that employee, and 2 out of 3 rules is what it amounts to on that certification. Okay? And then you're also paying for that. Now, employers will do this on occasion when they feel that the certification is suspect, that's within their right, and you're not retaliating against an individual, you just are doing a second opinion. That's fine. Now, you do that because if you let Joe go with this in the golf league, you've got another 25 employees that are about Joe's age that are going to do what? Potentially the same thing. I'm not saying they're all bad employees, but you've got some. Yes, ma'am. Will there be a discrimination problem or a retaliation problem if you do this for this one and not for the other one? The answer is no, because there was something in that certification form that triggered you to want to get that second opinion. It was life. This is the way I would answer the question. The difference here is that it was diagnosed as being a lifetime condition by a general practitioner. And all we're asking for is a specialist that we're paying for to make that determination. So you've got expense in the game, and that's why it's not considered retaliation. There has to be logic. If it came back from a specialist and you wanted to challenge it, then there's some chance for looking at that as being retaliation. But again, it's your money that's paying for it, so that's what gets you off the hook. Good question. So here's a couple scenarios I wanted to run by you of oopses. These are a little bit older cases, but I do like them. Boss, I need some time off for the international adoption my wife and I are involved in. You're supposed to be able to give your employer notice when you know things are going to happen, but with an international adoption as an example, which adoption qualifies for FMLA. However, in this particular case with Pfizer, what happened is that the employee didn't know that that meeting was coming up and they have to move pretty quick sometimes. And so the employer says, Jesus, Joe, Pfizer says, you can't go because we lined up this whole meeting, kind of like what you guys did when I wasn't able to make it, so thank you for understanding. But the whole meeting's wrapped around you. You've got to be there. You can't just go. You got to be here. Well, Joe didn't like that, and so he went to the Department of Labor and complained, and that cost Pfizer $660,000 because Pfizer thought that they could say that Joe didn't give us advance notice like he should of that adoption meeting. And yes, his boss didn't know adoptions is kind of like that M word thing. Didn't tell us about it, so that Joe's boss interfered with my FMLA right. Probably didn't even know that he did. Does it matter? No. And so it cost him $660,000. This is the only notice that the employee contended was necessary in order to invoke the FMLA rights, and the Fourth Circuit agreed. The court agreed, and then at that point, $660,000 was the penalty, and institution or restitution to Joe. Michael's, $8 million. Joe informed his employee or his boss that he needed to take 6 to 8 weeks of leave to get better after knee surgery. No big deal, right? I need that time. Well, Michael's knew that they were going through, Michael's is that arts and crafts store, retailer. They knew that they were going through some changes and needed to downsize. They needed to reduce their labor force. Okay. So never put things in an email, guys. Really. The stuff I get, don't do that. Call me because I really don't remember much. Please don't put stuff that you don't want to be evidence later in emails. Think about that. I need to talk to you about a matter. That's about as close as you need to get, and then talk on the phone. It's millennials that start that stuff. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, from the standpoint of wanting to use technology for communication, and God bless you for that. But don't put all of your stuff in emails. It is very, very dangerous. And however, Michaels didn't listen to that. 10 days after the request, the boss recommended that the employee's position be eliminated, and he was terminated. Sounds like retaliation to me. Yes, ma'am. Could this individual been identified as a key employee. And let's say this director of communications was making $500,000 a year. So, well, I can't remember that $100,000, $120,000 threshold for key employee. The answer is yes, it could be. But they failed to tell that director of communication that he was a key employee. So failure to tell somebody that they are a key employee and exempted from FMLA means they're not a key employee, because they need to be aware that their job is at risk. And if you don't do that, then they are a normal employee. They are an employee. I won't say normal, I'll just say employee. But good question. Thank you. And so what happened here is that, okay, they decided to lay off some people, and they thought, well, we'll let this guy go too. The company claimed that the FMLA request had nothing to do with the layoffs. Of course, that's what they're going to say. After all, the economy was sluggish, and other layoffs had been made as a result. So it wasn't just Joe. They laid off a bunch of people. Makes sense so far. A review of the company emails reviewed a message from the boss that basically said, we may as well lay the employee off because he'll be on leave anyway. So, retaliation. Michael said that's not the case. We're going to fight this. And so that's within their right to do, go through all the appeals process. Now, things like this, it just doesn't start out at $8 million. It doesn't. Let's say Joe was making $100,000 a year. How do you get from $100,000 to $8 million? Pretty large jump, right? This is what happens. Wages, salary, employee benefits, and other compensation denied or lost. So you're looking at wages, employee benefits, so I was laid off. I had to pay for my own health insurance then, right? For a family plan at $2,500, okay, $2,500 a month. Now, when you take the FMLA or the Department of Labor to court as an employer, I tell this to employers along with their inside and outside counsel. God bless them, I love them all sometimes, maybe not. But it takes 2.5 to 3.5 years to get this through to get a determination. Now, if you take a look at legal fees, if you take a look at fines and penalties, you take a look at the wage accumulation of $100,000 times 3 years, that's $300,000. Take employee benefits at $12,000, $24,000, $36,000, so I'm up to $360,000 before I even add the legal fees. Add the legal fees, it's going to be 2 times that amount. So now I'm at $720,000, and I haven't even blinked yet. So when I see these kinds of things, I talk to the employers and say, let's think this through just a little bit. Did you or did you not screw up? And if you screwed up, again, no lawyers here, let's get the hell out of this mess before it gets really bad and settle it. Because you screwed up, and remember all that documentation I talked about before that you'll never ever be able to produce? Because it doesn't stop there. Because you did this to me, you probably did this to somebody else, right? And so they're going to dig. And when they dig, out of that list of stuff, they're going to find. And when they find, they're going to penalize, especially if you try to run it through the system. You can win. I won't say that you will not win, but do you want to run this kind of risk over a 3-year period? I would say talk to your risk analysis and people and get their opinion is where I would be. Reinstatement, liquidated damages, interest. A typical, now that's high, but here's what we're looking at on a typical judgment. This is Walters versus Mayo Clinic. An employee brought an action against her former employer for violation of the FMLA and Americans with Disability Act. Back pay for three years was $259,000. Pre-judgment interest was $12,000. Liquidated damages was $271,000. And typically that runs 2 times the loss in pay is how they get to that number. And then plaintiff attorney's fees and costs, $393,000 because they won, so you're paying the employee's attorney, just what every employer wants to do. And then the plaintiff's non-attorney legal fees was $19,000, which brought it up to from $250,000 to $1 million, $956,000. And that's what happens. Intermittent or reduced scheduled leave are most problematic, as identified in Joe's back condition. This is why you want to spend time reviewing that certification form and possibly challenging that or getting clarification, especially if you can't read those forms and stuff like that or don't understand them. Kick it back. You, as long as you're not the direct manager of that employee, as in other words, if you're in HR and this is an operations or a shop type of person or an admin person, an accounting person, you can call the doctor's office and say, I don't understand this. Can you resend me a fax certification and just clarify what this means? Sometimes they'll do that, sometimes they won't. If they don't do that, just give it back to the employee, take it back to your healthcare provider. Typically, when they have to do a clarification, they don't charge a second fee. Sometimes they will, just depending on that doctor's office. They make money. It's a revenue stream for them, believe me, even at $50 a pop. So they can do that, charge. And so just look at those and make sure that you're understanding what that FMLA leave is all about. Retaliation and interference. Under FMLA, there's only 2 types of claims. Forget everything, all that legal stuff that we talked about, all those timelines and all that sort of stuff, you know, all that. Just forget about that for a second. There's 2 silos that an employee can file an FMLA claim against an employer, and only 2 silos. Silo 1 is retaliation, and silo 2 is interfering with my FMLA. And so those words are pretty easily defined. And employee interference, employer denied or interfered with employees' rights under the FMLA. In other words, the employee mentioned the M word about their spouse to the supervisor, and the spouse or the supervisor or the front office said they didn't ask for FMLA, so if they don't ask for it, I'm not giving it to them. Right? If they don't ask, why would you volunteer it? A lot of employers think that that's okay, that the employee must ask. Once they become knowledgeable that a condition may be potentially FMLA qualifying without the employee becoming directly asking for it, then that employer has an obligation to invoke the FMLA. It's no free pass. Some employers think that they can just say, they didn't ask for it, I'm not giving it to them. Supervisor, they didn't ask for it, I'm not going to tell anybody. If they would have asked for it, I wouldn't have fired them. I don't think that's going to work. So be very, very careful, and that's why that M word is really front office stuff. Retaliated against an individual that had an FMLA qualifying, even if he didn't invoke, even if FMLA was not in place. So if it was an FMLA qualifying event, like my wife's depression, but I didn't file for FMLA, but you knew, and then you were charging me points, or you got terminated for that, or knocked down and I didn't get a good performance review, then at that point, performance reviews, I'm going to stop. HR people, when you work with your managers and supervisors to do performance reviews, especially if you accept written statements, which there's nothing wrong with accepting written statements, okay? Educate them to not give opinions, only not subjective, always objective information. Joe makes bad parts, poor performance. What the hell does Joe make bad parts mean? Compared to who and compared to what? Now that supervisor is gone because you terminated him maybe for some other reason, but I had my wife with depression, I got a bad performance review, I'm not making the money that my coworkers are making, and that supervisor is gone because he used objective information. Joe makes bad parts. His requirement is that because we do piecework, he is to do 100 pieces per hour with a 95% quality goal achievement. Joe does 70 pieces per hour and is only making 60% quality parts. You see the difference between the two? And so then, in my opinion, Joe is a problematic employee. You know, and that's an opinionated statement that's written down by a supervisor. In my opinion, means diddly squat, because each of you, every one of you, being a manager or supervisor, I don't like you because you have hidden biases. Whether you care to recognize it or not, you don't like me because I have a mustache. You don't like me because I am old. And I don't know why you don't like me, but I know you don't like me. You have a hidden bias. And because of that, you are discriminating against me because of my age or some other type of thing. Always objective and always defined. If they don't do that on the performance review, kick it back and have them fix it. And then sooner or later, they'll get it and train them. Very, very important, because it's not just for FMLA. It goes to, has nothing to do with that other than interference and retaliation, but it gets to EEOC, discrimination, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, sorry. When we take a look at it from the standpoint of what happens is interference is denying FMLA leave, discouraging an employee from taking the leave, or denying reinstatement after the leave. Retaliation is terminating an employee, demoting, or considering FMLA absences as a negative factor on a performance review. Pretty simple. Those are what the employee can come after you for. When they contact the DOL or the DOL administrator contacts them for a review to see if they're going to pursue it with the employer, these are the kinds of things that they're asking those questions. Did they retaliate or did they interfere? What did they do to you? And they can say, well, they don't like me, they did this and they did this. If it doesn't hit one of these two silos, they're going to blow it off. Yes, ma'am? Yes. The question is that even in a union environment, if they're taking a look at the number of absences that an employee has, and part of those are FMLA as they utilize that to bid on different jobs, and if they're counting those FMLA absences as absences, is that retaliation for taking FMLA? The answer is clearly and unequivocally yes. I would go with that one personally. And I'm good. I'm really good at that. No. I scare basic. They think I'm going to file. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. No, they'd be lost. No, I'm kidding. I drive them just as crazy, too. Okay. Fraud and abuse. When we take a look at an FMLA fraud and abuse, Joe is going out golfing with his bad back and he can't work. Is that fraud and abuse? The answer is really no. It's stupidity, but it's not fraud and abuse. In other words, because I'm doing that doesn't mean my back isn't hurting the next day, right? So I'm not fraudulently claiming an FMLA. I may be to a certain extent abusing the FMLA by doing such a stupid thing, but I still have the pain and the consequence from it. That's just dumb. Use of deception while on FMLA leave, or is untruthful as it pertains to FMLA leave. That's fraudulent or abuse. Fraud does not occur solely based on an employee not being home, sick in bed. We talked about that depression and anxiety stuff when I'm out with my spouse. Fraud is when an employee requests, uses FMLA leave, time that falls outside of that medical purpose. I have certification for migraine, but I take my kids to the pool. That is fraudulent use of FMLA. I have migraines, but I come into work 15 minutes late with my Starbucks cup of coffee every third morning or something like that. That's fraudulent use of FMLA. Now you know that, you have to do what? Investigate it, right? And prove it. And so this is where you try to get the employee to admit to it. Mary, we had employees come to us, and you posted on your FML or on your Facebook that we were told about by other employees that you actually went to the pool when you called off for a migraine. Is that true? I shouldn't have done it, but yes. Bam. Did you get them for FMLA? Not really. You got them for the fraudulent use of FMLA and breach of your ethics policy on lying to the employer. And that's the action you take. Make sense? Okay. That's how you catch that. The Starbucks person, what you need to do is consider, because if you have one Starbucks-like person, you have more than one, but you have to start somewhere with an example, right? You understand where I'm going with this. And so you investigate. Put an investigator on that person. Could be your internal security, as long as it's a security department, or an outside investigator, and catch Joe leaving 15 minutes late for work, stopping at Starbucks 3 or 4 times. Bring them in, and they can also bring in a representative. That's their right if they want to do that, to meet with you and also your counterpart. Try to get me to admit to that. I didn't do that, you know. Well, I still had my migraine. There's nothing that says I didn't have a migraine that morning or those mornings when I was coming in. How do you know I didn't have a migraine? And you can't do this to me, and I'm going to sue you if you do that, right? That's the answer by Defiant Joe, because I'm your Class A 10% employee. Hold that thought. Employer suspects FMLA intermittent leave abuse and condition. Make sure that you ask the employer to provide clarification. And when you go back, when we're looking at frequency and duration, Joe is supposed to have 3 events, or could have up to 3 events lasting 4 to 8 hours, 3 times a month. So in other words, it's giving me a free pass for 3 days. So what happens when I go 1 month and I did 4 days? Can you come after me because I breached my certification? Absolutely not. Because like everybody else, doctors aren't perfect, right? They're just a guesstimate type of, they can be wrong. It could be 4 times. It could be 5 times a month. I'm not sure. And that's the answer to the question. Here's how you catch that. You look for a pattern of occurrences. Joe started out taking 3 days off a month for his migraines, according to his certification. He forgot that the second month and took 4 days off the second month. So now he had 7 occurrences in 2 months. Okay. It's looking kind of suspicious. And also maybe they're happening on Thursdays and Fridays, or Monday, Thursday kind of scenario. What's happening? Not all of them. Throw in a couple Tuesdays every now and then too. Or maybe a Saturday if you're supposed to work on Saturday, had a migraine. And so the 3rd month, I'm off 5 times. The 4th month, I'm off 4 times. And now you've got a pattern of exceeding. And so we use a specialized form, but you can do the same. Joe took the 1st month, Monday or Tuesdays and Thursdays. Here's the date he took. Here's the dates. Here's half a day, full day on these days. 3 times he did that. Next month, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday. Full days, partial days. The next month, this is what Joe took, and you list all of these out. We had 3, 7, 12. In the 4th month, we had 19 occurrences in 5 months. You know what you do with that? You give that to me, push me back, and say, we need to get clarification from your healthcare provider. We're concerned about you, Joe, and your condition. We want to make sure you're okay. We say, take this to your doctor and have your healthcare provider take a look at this, because your condition may be a little bit more serious than what you initially thought it was. And you're thinking to yourself, you jerk, we gotcha. Right? Finally, after 6 years, I finally got you. So Joe takes it to his healthcare provider, and his healthcare provider says, excuse the vernacular, Joe, what the hell are you doing? You know, come on, do you even have migraines? You know, I did this because you complained. What are you doing? Well, I'll tell you what. If I don't do this, you're going to lose your job. Do you know that? So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, we're reevaluating Joe, and this is a possibility. They are in business of not, it's like a dry cleaner. Please look at the comparison, not the professional. A dry cleaner isn't going to turn away their customers, right? You think a physician's going to turn away Joe and Joe's spouse and all 12 kids that I've got and say, and make me mad? No. But what you've done is that you've caught Joe, and that healthcare provider is going to say to Joe, going to tell me, don't you ever do this again. And oh, by the way, you owe me $50 for filling out this form. Don't you ever do this to me again. Because I want your relationship. We've known each other for a lot of years, but I can't do this. Now, healthcare providers today will do that. They will do that, and you probably ran into it. But you catch them. Now, Joe knows, and what does Joe do? He tells Pete. He tells Mary. He tells Sally, oh my God, I almost lost my job because I was doing stupid things. And then you're looking at a corrective action. That's the best that you can do. Now, if you actually know, remember I said that you know that you may have, I asked you to hold that thought. You think someone has abused the FMLA, you truly believe it, or they refuse to fill out the form and give it back to you, there's a catch-all right here in the regulations. It's called reasonable belief. This reasonable belief goes to, what do you think as an employer? Did you do the investigation about Joe going to Starbucks? Do you have the information from the investigator that says, yeah? Do you have it that Joe has exceeded his frequency and duration on his certification repeatedly? Do you have all of that? And Joe is swearing up and down, yeah, but I had migraines each and every morning. You as an employer have a right to invoke your reasonable belief. Joe, I don't give a crap what you're telling me. I think you're using the FMLA fraudulently, and I'm sorry, we've completed our investigation, and we're putting you on notice that you are currently suspended pending final review and investigation and determination. I didn't fire him because we never ever fire. Slap that sucker on the corner of your desk, wait 5 days, call me and say you're done. And let me file. Because chances are when the DOL comes to you to do an investigation based on my complaint, and you roll that out and you have a good attorney or professional, they're going to say that you had every right under reasonable belief and the findings to act. Did you say that Joe didn't have migraines? No. You just reasonably believe that it's too coincidental. You're not going to tell me what I had or didn't have. Even if you are wrong and I had migraines, put me on an electrocardiogram and, track my brain if you could do that and determine that I have that many. But did that change my reasonable belief? No. The Department of Labor will stand behind you with that, okay? That's a big deal. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, because
we have an individual that potentially is what we'll call fraudulently using the FMLA is where you're at. You have a reasonable belief that that employee is in fact taking advantage of FMLA illegally. It's not like speeding, you're breaking a federal law is what it amounts to as an employee. So as soon as you possibly can, I would write down all the dates of absences that were claimed as FMLA and require that, because you're holding those. I wouldn't say that these are going against your normal attendance policy. I would kind of forget you said that, sort of. And then what I would do is say, take these to your healthcare provider to see if your healthcare provider is agreeing with this. And you have 15 days to return this, document it, give them additional 7 days, and whether they do it or not becomes irrelevant. And then at that point, if that person doesn't bring it in and say this is a requirement, because if this time is not approved as FMLA, intermittent leave, then you have exceeded the attendance point system or your attendance policy and is subject to disciplinary action up to termination. Give them that period of time to get that information. I don't care what they tell you, as long as you document that you've asked and you get a response from that person, because I'll tell you why a response is important. Wait, that's 22-day period. Bring them in, suspend them pending final review, and then termination for failure to meet the attendance policy under a reasonable belief that the time away from work was not fully FMLA qualifying. And then it's on them to tell the Department of Labor and that investigator, why didn't they get that information? It's no longer your fault. You passed the buck. This will be a good place to put the other thing. I said make sure you get documentation and support. I'm going to talk about that, and also one last extremely important thing is looking at extenuating circumstances. Remember I said 825, write this down, 825, 29 CFR 825.313 A, B, and C. That covers extenuating circumstances that are the reasons why an employee doesn't return that certification form to you. I didn't know I had to return it is a good reason that sometimes the DOL will look at. And so extenuating circumstances is a catch-all that allows employees to come up with reasons why they didn't return that certification form to you, and reasons for the Department of Labor to hold you accountable when the employee screwed up. That's what it amounts to. The way you get around that is when you give the rights and responsibilities notice. I can't remember that number, that you're supposed to give the employees. You guys know what I'm talking about. At the bottom of that, right in that, if you have extenuating circumstances where you are not able to return information back to the employer, please contact Human Resources. Please advise so-and-so. Then you've cut off that catch-all, 825.313, because you've told the employee if they've had extenuating circumstances, this is what you do. And then the Department of Labor says at that point, damn, employee, why didn't you, when you had extenuating circumstances, they told you what to do, why didn't you do it? So the idea is you push it back on them. And not very many, it took me, and I've been doing FMLA since 1998, it took me up until one DOL audit like 4 years ago to figure that one out. That's one of those hidden gems. So very, very important. So have a consistent absence FMLA call-in policy. Create a process flow, just like you do for everything else, on how you handle your FMLA, because that's a good thing and you can evidence it. Track your intermittent leaves as well as your absences. Recommending establishing a 6-month recertification on a look-back period. Monitor the FMLA intermittent leave for all FMLA employees, and request clarification and certification when it's necessary. Look at leave as a reasonable accommodation beyond the FMLA. ADA did this to you, Joe didn't. Okay. 12 weeks in a day does not constitute a reason to terminate an individual, because a lot of times the additional time away from work was sufficient to cure a person so they can come back to work with or without an accommodation. So if you have a sticky situation, same or similar, then on your medical leaves, that sometimes if a person doesn't qualify for FMLA, you put them out on a medical leave because A, they're a good employee, and B, it's the right thing to do. I understand that. But I recommend that you put these medical leaves in place for no more than 30 days. Okay, there's a reason for that. So put somebody out on a FMLA, if they have like cancer, 30 days isn't going to be enough, right? And they may not be FMLA qualified because they didn't meet the 12 months and all that sort of stuff, but you're trying to work with this individual. So if they need a continuous leave, put them out on a medical leave for 30 days, subject to review, is where I'm going with that. Did I say you couldn't add another 30 days to it? Subject to review, or another 30 days, and then figure out what your cap is. And every employer is different. You can say 90 days is the maximum, 120 days, whatever you want to do is fine, but you're reevaluating every 30 days. When you have an FMLA return to work that doesn't happen in 12 weeks, then you automatically have a cap. You've already let that person off, and then you automatically kind of have a cap of an additional 30 days, and at that point you can bring it to a conclusion because they've exceeded the FMLA and not able to return back to work. Things like that. All you're doing is building in a consistent process safeguard that if you get asked a question, what's your logic? Our logic is that we didn't go beyond 30 days on this because, or 2 weeks, or whatever your criteria is because this is what we do for other types of medical leaves. You didn't do it just because it was Joe, you did it because of policy. You see where I'm at? And we ended it at 30 days because Joe has already exhausted his 12 weeks of FMLA, which gets us out to 16 weeks, and then ordinarily we don't run this beyond 90 days. Okay. What we're talking about is reasonable accommodation under ADA, and the answer is yes, it could very much be that. Write this down. Send me a letter, write this down. It's my brain, I can't help it. JAN, Job Accommodation Network. It's an extension of the Department of Labor, and I think it was either the University of Virginia or West Virginia that was contracted to develop this program. It is one of the best free programs out there sponsored by the Department of Labor that won't hurt you. It's for ADA accommodation. When you go to that site, go click on the employer tab. It will give you a bunch of forms, letters, etc. that you can use when you need to enter into a job accommodation for an employee. And under ADA, the most important thing is the interactive process. And Joe, has a 3-time rule on accommodation, is that you sit down with the employee, and let's say Joe is working in a manufacturing plant and he's lifting engines, him and his buddy is lifting, but I have a restriction, and one engine you can put bolts in the side, you can use a lift assist, so you can just use a hydraulic thing. This other engine that costs $1 bazillion, you can't put bolts in the side of it, and that's where I work. So Joe says we'll get a lift assist or redesign that engine to put the bolts in so I can use a lift assist. That would be a great accommodation. And the owner of the company says, I'm not spending $500,000 for that. Let's not do that. Let's take a look at some other accommodation, and maybe we can move you to another position as an accommodation. You can do that. You're not having the same restrictions under FMLA. And so it can be, but you need to be very, very careful, because an accommodation under ADA is how can you bring that person back to work. And so that's the key. The 3-time rule, and the 3-time rule is not the owner of the company saying, nope, it's not going to work. nope, it's not going to work, and nope, it's not going to work, and yep, you're out of here. That's not it. Thank you, because there's a couple, we're talking about workers' comp, ADA, and FMLA. I call it the Bermuda Triangle of life for us. When we take a look at it, first of all, run your FMLA concurrent at the same time with PTO, workers' comp, and any other types of leave that you have. That's number one. Number two, it's not the employee's right to have or not have FMLA. And when they come and say, well, I don't want my FMLA, I've got, 12 weeks of vacation time stored up, I'll take that, and if I want to take my FMLA after that, I'll take it then. FMLA is a federal law. And you would be breaking the law if you don't give them the FMLA. It's not their choice. If you know it's FMLA qualifying, put them under FMLA, because you don't want them to go out for 12 weeks of vacation and then 12 weeks of... So you run it always concurrent with PTO and vacation, unless you have some union contract stuff that you have to deal with. Yes, ma'am. It's... Workers' comp is related to a work-related injury. Person got hurt at work, they're not able to work. FMLA is to, and in your policies, I recommend that you always run your FMLA concurrent with your workers' comp, so that they can't take workers' comp time and then FMLA time following that. They're running them both at the same time, and that's totally legal and fine.
So if they're on work comp, you could also require them to take
FMLA at the same time.
with that work comp.
Right. And then once they've exhausted their time, because a lot of times employees forget to come back when they're on workers' comp, right? And maybe you don't want them back, and so you're able to negotiate them out. You don't want to have that interference with the FMLA afterwards if they want to spark and bark at you and try to get more money, is what it amounts to. So always run your FMLA concurrent with your workers' comp. Yeah. What happens is that under workers' comp, it's not a compensation. FMLA is a leave time, either paid or not, or paid under PTO or workers' comp, so it doesn't matter, just leave time for FMLA. Workers' comp, once you exhaust the 12 weeks of FMLA and they're still out on workers' comp, then you kind of have, lack of a better term, a free pass not to bring that employee back, because they put them out under FMLA, and then you're just negotiating, you're negotiating with your experience and the reserve that they have against that employee under workers' comp to get them from coming back. So that's a negotiation with the workers' comp people to buy that person out to keep them from coming back. As an accommodation?
After FMLA.
Well, typically I go out and drink beer with them, and no, okay. The answer is, what do you do as far as after they've completed their FMLA as it pertains to an accommodation and COBRA? During the FMLA, that is not a COBRA qualifying event, so the employer pays and then the employee pays their copay. After the FMLA event comes to an end, or that 12 weeks of time, that's a different story. Then that employee, if they do not return to work, that is a COBRA qualifying event, because they no longer have benefits available to them under a medical leave, if you put them under an extended medical leave, or for any other reason, okay? Now, usually when they're under workers' comp, then you guys have your own policies as it pertains to workers' comp, and probably continue that benefit, either having them pay their copay portion or not, because they were hurt at work, and what kind of relationship do you have with them with regard to that. Did that answer your question? Sure. Okay. Okay. This is a fact sheet from the EEOC, ADA, Americans Disability Act as amended. Congress has made it easier for an individual seeking protection under the ADA to establish that he or she has a disability within that statute that substantially limits or lowers the degree of functionality. And so what I'm going here, and then I've got a reference down here, a fact sheet, and please get a copy of the recorded session, and this way you'll be able to see these links a little bit better, and it'll be helpful to you. But I encourage you to do that. The extenuating circumstances, we talked about that. That's that employee no fault out. But we covered that when I said, put it on the rights and responsibility. If you have extenuating circumstances, please notify Human Resources. And so you get that covered. Termination for substance abuse before applying is permitted. And we talked about this during session 1. If I'm a druggie, you catch me, I can't come to you and say I want to invoke FMLA so I can go away and take care of my drugs. That doesn't work because I was caught. You can allow it if you wanted to, but you as an employer don't have to. If I come to you and say that I have to go into a treatment center because I have a habit and I wanted to let you know, then you say, okay, we're going to put you on FMLA and come see us when you're back, and we'll return you to work. But you may have to be monitored because we know we may have to put you under a monitoring program or something for a variety of different reasons. Number one, they operate a cash register. Duh. Something like that. Record keeping. The Department of Labor will typically come in with a request, most often than not, if it's just a scattergun approach, if they're just coming to visit you to say, hi, how are you, because they're in the area, they're not going to come and ask for 3 years of records. And typically, they won't. They may go a year or they may go 2, especially. That's the first indication to me if they're going a year or 2 that there's a complaint that's been filed. That's one of the ticklers I look at, is how long that investigation is. And then when you talk to them and you get through that initial shock, then they say, well, then they're able to drill it down to a couple different departments and they name those departments for you, then you know that you've had a complaint. And then the worst thing that could happen is to not disclose that information, all or in part, because when Joe filed his claim, they already know Joe was in Department 16. But if Joe's documentation is not in that release of information to the Department of Labor, been there, done that, it's not a very good thing, because now they're suspect and they're going to dig, and that's not a good position for you to have. So be very, very open and very outright. If you're not doing something correctly, I wouldn't necessarily volunteer a whole lot of information, but I would certainly say after I corrected it, we found some gaps and we've corrected those gaps, and this is what we've done to correct those gaps. Fix it before you tell them, but fix it really quick so you can tell them is the best way to look at that, and that will help on the backside. Dates FMLA with leave was taken, hours of FMLA, copies of employee notices of leave furnished, copies of written notices, documentation describing employee benefits, records of dispute regarding FMLA, GINA disclosures if you have any, all that sort of stuff like that. And ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you for putting up with me for this amount of time. Thank you so much.